What's up, brand builder? Today we're talking about how you can tell better stories than your competitors for your brand, of course. Now, brand storytelling is a critical element of raising brand awareness, building the kind of emotional connection with your target audience, and, of course, ultimately leading to sales and revenue. But if you look at the market segment, and I see this every day, most brands are not telling the right kind of stories. Now, when I say the right kind of stories, there are, of course, many different kinds of storytelling techniques that you can use to tell your brand story. Now, as mentioned in one of the previous videos, you should not confuse between origin story and your brand story. Now, origin story could be one of the brand stories that you tell, but it should not be the only one. So you should always look to a broad range of storytelling techniques to help get your brand ahead. All right. So first, let's take a look at 10 kinds of storytelling concepts that you could use to sort of take your brand to the next level, but also in terms of doing something different from the competitors. Now, of course, your competitors might be using one or more of these 10 different storytelling techniques. It's your job, of course, to figure out what's happening in the marketplace, what kind of storytelling techniques your competitors are using, and what would be the best one for you to use to strategically place yourself ahead of the competition. Purpose. You can talk about your purpose. Of course, your brand purpose is why your brand exists, right? That is the purpose. Why does it exist in this world? What kind of brand are you? What do you stand for? These are the things that you can talk about. You can turn that into a brand story and talk about your purpose. Not directly saying, okay, we believe in this, therefore we are so and so, our purpose is this, we stand for this. Not like that. Not in a preachy kind of, not in a kind of salesy kind of way. It's about talking about the things you stand for. For example, you could be, your brand purpose could be to bring about change in terms of poverty in this world, right? Even though your services might be not directly related to that, right? It could be something as important as bringing change in society. So your brand story should center around that. Of course, you could bring in the kind of services or products that your brand provides into the mix, but the core storytelling should be about your purpose. Next, you can talk about the vision. Your vision can become your brand story. Your vision is, of course, the kind of change you want to bring in this world. Or it could be the future of your market segment, the future of your brand, the future of your customers in terms of the services or products that you provide. So that is your vision, right? And you could be telling brand stories about your vision. Not the vision itself, but about the vision. So the story should be aligning with the target audience in terms of what your vision means to them and their worldview. Another popular but not fully utilized kind of storytelling, brand storytelling, is customer stories. You can look at brands like Airbnb who do a great job at telling customer stories. Zappos does that too. So look at your landscape, look at your competitors. If they're not really focusing or they're not emphasizing on customer stories, then that should be your brand storytelling kind of technique that you focus on. Customer stories is, of course, using your product or service, but also the pain points of your customers. So think of the kind of journey that your customer takes to get to your service or your product, or the benefits that they enjoy from your products or services, right? So take that journey and then break that down into stories. Or it could be something like sustainability. Now, I'm not talking about greenwashing. Greenwashing is where you don't really believe in sustainability, or you don't really care. I mean, your brand or your products and services are not really directly related to sustainability. And yet you talk about sustainability because it is a cool thing and you want your target audience to think that you care, that your brand cares. That is greenwashing. I'm not talking about greenwashing. I'm talking about if your brand, if your purpose, your vision, if your product, if your service, if your audience care about sustainability, then you could use that as a storytelling. It's something that I used to believe in, but I'm really hesitating now to talk about because of heavy greenwashing. I mean, brands are, they just use sustainability these days just to make themselves look good, but it's not working anymore. People can see through it. So if you can do it in an authentic way, if you have an authentic reason to do it, then you can take that as one of your brand storytelling techniques. Next, you can take passion as your storytelling framework. Passion of the founder, right? Or founders, or passion that your target audience might share. For example, at Spellbrand, okay, passion of the founder. I'm one of the founders, and my passion, a huge part of our storytelling is based on my passion and the passion of our potential target audience, which is entrepreneurship, building brands, building the best brands, serving their customers, things like that. And our storytelling is based on that passion. So it could be the passion of the founder, or it could be the passion of the customers or potential target audience. So what are your passions as aligned to your product or service? Of course, building brands is directly related to what we do. So my passion and the storytelling go hand in hand, and it works. If it works in your case, then use that as your kind of storytelling framework. Another great strategy is us versus them, right? This kind of storytelling, us versus them. Us versus them is quite powerful if you are genuine about it, if you're telling an authentic story. So what does it mean, us versus them? Well, if you're coming in into a market segment where there's already the kind of brands or companies or businesses that are really spoiling the market, or they're abusing the market, or if the target audience is unhappy with those brands and what they're doing, but have no choice, then us versus them works really well. You don't really say that, hey, we are better than them, or, look at us. Not like that. You got to tell the story in such a way that the target audience can see the difference between your brand and other brands in the same space. Again, this is something that you need to do very carefully. Okay, you got to take caution when you approach this strategy. Us versus them can work if done properly. Next is, of course, emotional stories. Now, of course, this should be at the top of the list, and mostly you could consider anything to be an emotional story, right? But that's where you may sort of take it for granted. A lot of brands tell emotional stories, but not in the right way. Emotional stories is where you sort of tie into the emotions that your target audience and your customers have towards a pain point in their life, and then you tell that story. Not how you're going to solve it, or not that your product or service solves it, but rather just approaching the emotion and telling a story about it. This could also work in tandem with customer stories, right? Emotional stories and customer stories, they're different, but sometimes they can be the same thing. So think of the emotions that your customers are going through and tell stories based on that. Research what your competitors are doing. Look at how the big brands are telling emotional stories. Next, you can tell moral stories. Now, moral stories, again, you got to be careful with moral stories. Moral stories are when there is a certain pain point that your clients or your customers, your target audience has, and you sort of maybe look at the root cause of such pain points, or the kind of situations that your customers might be in, and spin some moral stories. Now, I'm not talking about preaching, right? This is not thou art to do this, not that like that, right? Not in that way, but moral stories that make your customers feel good about themselves, right? Or your target audience. So moral stories, and these could be directly related to your products or services, or they could be peripherally related. They could be based on certain morals that your target audience can recognize and can sort of appreciate. Next, you could use breaking false beliefs as your brand stories. So what are false beliefs? False beliefs are the beliefs that your target audience or your customers might have about your service or your product, right? So, for example, if you're a luxury brand then one of the false beliefs is that it's expensive, right? Your products might be expensive. How do you break that? You can tell stories of how, again, tying into customer stories of how someone might have invested in your product. Well, not in your product, but products of similar nature. And then how they might have gained enjoyment. They might have gained happiness out of this, or status, or how this, you can see this in luxury brands, fine wines. You could see it almost all the fashion houses. They use this kind of storytelling to great effect. Breaking false beliefs, I think, can be done in any sector, not just luxury, because everyone has false beliefs about every service or product. So you can find an opportunity in your market segment to break false beliefs. Set your audience up to understand and recognize what these false beliefs are and what the truth really is, which of course leads to your services or products. But do it with taste, right? Do it with real intent that your customers or your target audience benefits from it. And finally, the rags to riches stories. Okay, so if you're an underdog, or if you've achieved something within your market segment, within your industry, with your products, then use the rags to riches story. Tell about your brand. Maybe, you entered a market that was, crawling with huge brands, and you're a one-man shop or one-woman shop, and you entered and you made a change, or you made a difference for your customers. Rags to riches, tell that. Or you could tie back to customer stories of how your customers went from one state to a better state. Rags to riches doesn't necessarily mean money, right? One state to a better state by using your product or services. Or similar stories that take your audience from one state to a different state, not just with your products or services, but with concepts. So rags to riches. I hope you found this list useful. And of course, each one of these can be turned into a video. Maybe I might do a video on each of these. But for the scope of this, just remember that you need to have a varied kind of storytelling framework. But you must have fundamental stories nailed down. Those are the stories that you tell, and then you expand the scope of your storytelling. But always remember, you got to be telling your brand stories properly. Not just your origin stories or products and feature stories, but your brand stories. And if you have any questions about this video, just leave a comment below and I will answer. Till my next video, take care.